I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery rumbling outside my house. At first, I thought it was just another construction project in the neighborhood, but then I saw it, a massive concrete bridge spanning across my land. My land. I stumbled outside, heart pounding, only to find workers in hard hats finishing up the final details. Cars were already driving across it, and people were walking over my property like it was a public road. I stormed up to the nearest worker. "Who gave you permission to build this?" He barely looked at me. "HOA orders, sir." My blood boiled. The Homeowners Association, the same people who once fined me for leaving my trash cans out too long, had illegally built a bridge across my private property. I wasn't even part of the HOA. Fuming, I marched to the HOA office, demanding answers. The smug-looking president, Mr. Gerald Carter, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Oh, that? We needed a quicker route for the community, and your land was the perfect spot. You weren't using it anyway." My fist clenched. "You can't just build on my land without permission." "Well," he said, adjusting his tie, "technically we can. It's called eminent domain." I had never wanted to punch someone so badly in my life. Then, a brilliant idea hit me. If they were going to use my land without permission, I was going to make them pay. Big time. A few months earlier, I had been living a peaceful life in my old farmhouse, just outside the HOA's fancy neighborhood. I had inherited the land from my grandfather, and while it wasn't much, it was mine. I enjoyed the solitude, the quiet mornings with my coffee, and watching the deer wander through my fields. But everything changed when the HOA started expanding. The rich folks in their pristine homes wanted more convenience, and my land was in their way. It started small. First, I got letters asking if I wanted to sell. I ignored them. Then, real estate agents started knocking on my door, offering me a generous deal. I told them to get lost. Then came the harassment. One day, I found my fence mysteriously cut. Another time, my mailbox disappeared. The HOA denied any involvement, but I wasn't stupid. Then, things got worse. One evening, I returned home to find a massive pile of dirt and construction materials dumped at the edge of my land. Confused, I asked around, but no one knew anything, or so they claimed. Then, one morning, I heard the sound of jackhammers. I ran outside, and that's when I saw them, bulldozers tearing through my property. I yelled, waved my arms, tried to stop them, but the workers just ignored me. When I called the police, they told me it was a civil dispute, and I need to take it up with the HOA. That's when I knew. They were trying to force me out. I had no idea how bad things would get, but I was about to find out, because the next morning, I woke up to find the entire bridge spanning across my land was already built. And that's when I decided, if they wanted to take advantage of me, I was going to take advantage of them right back. I was about to make more money than I had ever dreamed of. That night, I stayed up researching property laws. I learned something interesting. They didn't have the legal right to build on my land. More importantly, I learned about toll fees. I grinned. Oh, this was going to be fun. The next day, I called a lawyer. A really good lawyer. When I showed him the bridge, his eyes widened. "This is an illegal structure," he said. "They have no right to build here. Can I charge them for using it?" I asked. He smirked. "Oh, absolutely." The next morning, I put up a giant sign in front of the bridge. "Private property, $10 toll per vehicle." I even set up a booth with a cash register and a card reader. If people wanted to use my land, they were going to pay for it. At first, people laughed. Then they got mad. The HOA was furious. Mr. Carter stormed over to my house, red in the face. "You can't do this," he yelled. "Actually," I said, holding up the legal documents, "I can. This is private property, and you build on it illegally. You either pay me or tear down the bridge." The HOA had spent hundreds of thousands building that bridge. Tearing it down would cost them even more. They had no choice. They paid up, but I wasn't done. I had one more surprise for them, because that was the moment I decided. I wasn't just going to charge them. I was going to own them. Mr. Carter's face was turning the color of a ripe tomato. The sight of him fuming on my porch, barely able to contain his anger, was something I wanted to frame and hang on my wall. "You can't charge tolls. This is illegal," he spat, pointing at my freshly painted $10 toll PR vehicle sign. I leaned against my door frame, grinning. "Funny. That's exactly what I said when I woke up and found a bridge on my land. He opened his mouth, closed it, then gritted his teeth. We'll take legal action. I raised an eyebrow and held up the official property documents my lawyer had printed. Go ahead. You'll lose. He snatched the papers from my hand and scanned them, his expression growing darker with every second. I could see it in his eyes. He knew I had him cornered. You're making a mistake, he finally muttered. Oh no, I said, stepping closer, lowering my voice just enough to make sure only he could hear me. You made the mistake. I'm just cashing in on it. And just like that, I slammed the door in his face. The first day of toll collection was glorious. Cars lined up on both sides of the bridge, drivers honking in frustration as I sat in my tiny booth, sipping coffee and charging $10 a pop. Some people grumbled. Some yelled. But every single one of them paid. What choice did they have? The only other road out of the neighborhood was a 20-minute detour. By the end of the day, my cash box was stuffed, and my bank account was a little fatter. I had officially turned their arrogance into my gold mine. But then, things took a turn. Because the HOA, they weren't going to take this lying down. 2 days later, they shut off my water. I turned on the faucet, expecting a steady stream. Nothing. Just a few sputtering drops. Confused, I checked my pipes, called the water company, and that's when I found out. The HOA controlled the water supply to the neighborhood. And because my house was technically adjacent to their community, they had the authority to shut it off. It was dirty. It was underhanded. And it was war. They thought they could bully me into submission? Oh, they had no idea who they were messing with. I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer. Can they do this? There was a pause, then a slow chuckle. No, but they're trying to see if you'll cave. I grinned. Let's make them regret it. The very next morning, I filed an emergency injunction. By noon, a judge had ordered the HOA to restore my water supply immediately. The HOA fought it. They stalled, they argued, but in the end, they lost. By 2 p.m., water was flowing through my taps again. By 3 p.m., I decided to raise the toll fee to $20. You mess with me, I mess with your wallets. When Mr. Carter saw the new sign, he lost it. He stormed back onto my property, this time with a lawyer of his own. This is extortion, he shouted. I sipped my coffee. This is capitalism. We'll go to court. I shrugged. You'll lose. His lawyer whispered something in his ear. Whatever it was, it made him go pale. That's when I knew they were out of options. But they weren't done yet. Because that night, they tried it at 3 a.m. I woke up to the sound of metal grinding and concrete cracking. I bolted out of bed and ran outside. And there, under the dim glow of the streetlights, I saw them. HOA hired workers. With jackhammers. Tearing apart MY Bridge. Rage exploded in my chest. Hey, I bellowed. The workers froze. Then, one of them bolted for a truck. I grabbed my phone and did the one thing I knew would make them regret this instantly. I called the cops. By the time the police arrived, the workers had done some damage, but not enough. The bridge was still standing, but a few cracks and holes now scarred its surface. One officer turned to me. Did you authorize this construction? I crossed my arms. Nope. This is my land. That's my bridge. I have all the legal documents. The officer nodded. Then he turned to the workers. Who sent you? They hesitated. Then one of them muttered, Mr. Carter. Busted. The next morning, I pressed charges. Now, the HOA wasn't just paying me toll money. They were about to pay for damages, too. Mr. Carter? Oh, he was in deep. But here's the thing. I wasn't done yet. Because while the HOA was scrambling to fix their mess, I was about to pull off the biggest move yet. I was going to buy out the HOA itself. Mr. Carter was cornered, and he knew it. His little stunt, trying to destroy the bridge in the dead of night, had backfired in the worst way. Now, he wasn't just dealing with me. He was dealing with the law. The police report was filed. The charges were pressed. The HOA was bleeding money. Not only were they paying me thousands in toll fees every day, but now they had to shell out even more for legal fees, damages, and repairs. I should have felt satisfied. I should have kicked back, counted my money, and watched them suffer. But no, I wanted more. Because while the HOA was busy scrambling to fix their problems, I was about to become their biggest problem. After the lawsuit was in full swing, I started digging into the HOA's finances. And what I found, They were drowning in debt. Between high maintenance costs, lawsuits from other homeowners, and my brand new toll fees, their finances were crumbling. And then I found the golden ticket, an auction notice. The HOA had taken out a massive loan for their community expansion. And guess what? They were defaulting. Their properties, including their own office building, were about to be put up for sale. I almost laughed. The same people who tried to bully me, who build on my land without permission, who try to break me down piece by piece. They were the ones about to lose everything. And I was about to buy them out. The day of the auction, I walked into that room like I owned the place. Because soon, I would. The auctioneer listed off the properties, and I bid on every single one. The HOA board members, including Mr. Carter, were sitting at the back, watching helplessly as their entire operation slipped through their fingers. And then it happened. The HOA headquarters went up for sale. I raised my paddle. There was no counteroffer. Sold. The room went silent. I turned my head slowly, locking eyes with Mr. Carter. He looked like he was about to be sick, because now I owned the HOA building. I owned the very office where they had schemed against me. And in a matter of weeks, I was going to own the entire HOA. Of course, Mr. Carter didn't go down without a fight. He called an emergency HOA meeting that same evening, trying to rally the remaining members. "This is unacceptable," he roared, slamming his fist on the table. "We have to stop him. We can't let this outsider take over." I leaned back in my chair, feet up on the table. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did you forget? I own this building now." He shot up from his seat, face turning red. You can't just. I also bought half the HOA's properties." I smirked, which means, legally speaking, I'm eligible to join the board. The room went dead silent. And then, one of the other board members, Mrs. Thompson, an older woman who had clearly had enough of Carter's nonsense, folded her arms and said, "You know what? I vote we let him in." Carter whipped around. "You can't be serious." She shrugged. "You've done nothing but cost us money. Maybe it's time for some fresh leadership." The other board members murmured in agreement. And just like that, the vote passed. I was now officially on the HOA board. I leaned forward, grinning. "Oh, Carter, you're fired." He tried to fight it. He tried everything, appealing to the residents, calling in favors, even threatening another lawsuit. But none of it worked, because at the end of the day, I had more power, more money, and more influence than he did. And when the final vote came in, Carter was removed from the HOA permanently. You'd think that would be the end of the story, but it wasn't. Because after all of that, after taking down the HOA, after making millions off my toll fees, after winning everything, someone tried to burn my house down. The smell of smoke was what woke me up. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard the crackling, and when I opened my eyes, I saw it. A flickering orange glow outside my bedroom window. My heart stopped. I bolted out of bed, ran to the window, and what I saw sent ice through my veins. My front porch was on fire. Flames licked up the wooden steps, curling toward the doorway. Thick smoke billowed into the night sky. The fire was spreading fast. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and sprinted for the back door. By the time I got outside, the fire had completely engulfed the front of my house. My throat burned from the smoke, my lungs screaming for clean air. The heat was unbearable. Then I saw them, a figure standing in the shadows, watching. For a split second, I locked eyes with them. Then they turned and ran. The fire department arrived just in time to stop my house from being reduced to ash. But the damage was bad, really bad. Half my porch was gone. The front siding was scorched black. Windows shattered from heat. But I was alive. And whoever did this, they were going to regret it. The police showed up, took my statement, and started their investigation. "Any enemies?" one officer asked. I almost laughed. "Yeah, about 50, but I knew exactly who my prime suspect was." The next morning, I paid a little visit to Mr. Gerald Carter. He was holed up in his mansion at the end of the neighborhood, the same house the HOA had paid for with their ridiculous fines. I didn't bother knocking. I walked right up to his front door and kicked it open. He jumped up from his leather couch, spilling his coffee all over himself. "What the?" I pointed a finger straight at him. "You tried to burn my house down." His eyes widened. Then Just as quickly, he forced a smirk. What are you talking about? I took a step closer. Don't play dumb, Carter. I saw someone outside my house last night. He laughed, actually laughed. Oh, please. If I wanted to get rid of you, I wouldn't be so sloppy. I clenched my fists. So, you're saying it wasn't you? Oh, I wanted it to be me. He sneered, wiping coffee off his shirt. But no, I had nothing to do with your little fire problem. I didn't believe him. Not for a second. But if it wasn't Carter, then that meant someone else wanted me gone. By noon, the police confirmed it. It was arson. Gasoline had been poured on my porch. The fire was intentional. But no fingerprints. No cameras. No witnesses. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. That's when I realized I had made more enemies than I thought. It was time to go on the offensive. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for another attack. I was going to force my enemies into the light. So, I did the one thing that would drive them insane. I doubled the toll fees. $40 per vehicle. And this time, no more cash option. Every driver had to register through my new digital toll system, which meant I now had a list of every single person who used the bridge. Whoever attacked me, they would have to use the bridge eventually. And when they did, I'd know exactly who they were. At first, people thought it was a joke. Then, the complaints started rolling in. And then, someone tried to sabotage the toll booth. It happened 2 nights later. I had installed motion sensors and cameras around the toll booth, just in case someone tried to mess with it. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected at toll booth 1. I checked the camera feed, and there, clear as day, was a masked figure crouching near the payment system, trying to break into the electronics. Bingo! I grabbed my keys, hopped in my truck, and sped toward the bridge. By the time I got there, the figure was still hunched over the toll machine, completely unaware that I was about to ruin their night. I killed the headlights and crept closer. Then, bang! I slammed the truck door shut. The masked figure whipped around, startled. I flicked on my flashlight and aimed it right at them. And when I saw who it was, my blood ran cold. Because it wasn't Carter. It was one of my own neighbors. Mr. Jacobson, a guy I had never had problems with before. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the HOA anymore. The entire neighborhood wanted me gone. Jacobson froze like a deer in headlights. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating his guilty face. I took a step closer. You've got 5 seconds to explain what the hell you're doing. His hand shook as he dropped his crowbar. Look, man, it's not what you think. I kicked the crowbar away. Oh, really? Because it looks like you were trying to destroy my toll system. His eyes darted around, like he was looking for an escape. They made me do it. I frowned. Who? Jacobson hesitated. Then he bolted. But I was faster. I lunged forward, grabbed him by the collar, and slammed him against the toll booth. Who? Sant. You. He gasped, struggling. The HOA. The residents. Everyone okay? You pissed off the whole damn neighborhood. My grip tightened. And that makes it okay to set my house on fire? His face twisted in genuine shock. That wasn't me. I swear. I had nothing to do with that. I studied his expression. He looked terrified, which meant someone else was responsible for the arson. I slowly let him go. He coughed and rubbed his throat. Look, man, it's not personal. People are just sick of you charging them to use the bridge. I folded my arms. Oh, you mean the bridge that I never wanted in the first place? The one that the HOA built illegally? Jacobson had the nerve to look sheepish. Well, I shook my head. These people had some serious entitlement issues. I took a step back and gestured toward the toll machine. You know what? Since you hate paying the toll so much, let's make a deal. He frowned. What kind of deal? I grinned. You're going to tell me everything you know about who's been working against me. Names, meetings, threats, everything. And in exchange, I pulled out my phone and typed something into the toll system. Then, I turned the screen toward him. His eyes widened. Congratulations, I said. You just earned yourself free passage for life. Jacobson spilled everything. The HOA might have been crumbling, but the neighborhood had formed their own resistance. It wasn't just about the tolls. People were furious that I had humiliated Carter, taken over the HOA, and, worst of all, profited off their mistake. There had been secret meetings at the community center, plans to pressure me into selling. A few folks even wanted to sabotage the bridge completely. But then he said something that made my stomach drop. There's one guy you should really worry about. I leaned in. Who? Jacobson swallowed hard. Bryce Landon. The name sent a cold chill through me. Bryce Landon wasn't just some annoyed resident. He was ex-military, ex-private security, and a complete psycho. And according to Jacobson, Bryce was the one behind the arson. That night, I sat in my truck, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about survival. Bryce had tried to burn me out. And if he was willing to do that, what was stopping him from trying again? I needed a plan. I needed leverage. And most of all, I needed to end this war before it ended me. The next morning, I did something that made the entire neighborhood lose their minds. I closed the bridge. Completely. I parked 2 massive construction trucks on either side, blocking all traffic. Then I put up a new sign. Bridge closed until further notice. The result? Absolute chaos. People were furious. Cars lined up for miles, drivers honking and shouting. The HOA board, what was left of it, showed up at my house, screaming about lawsuits and contracts. And I just sat on my porch, sipping my coffee, watching the world burn. By noon, the news vans started rolling in. Local reporters wanted to know why a critical neighborhood bridge had been shut down. I stood in front of the cameras, holding up a stack of police reports. I was a victim of arson last week, I announced. Someone tried to burn my house down. And last night, a resident tried to sabotage my toll system. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I continued. Until I know I'm safe, this bridge stays closed. Then I dropped the bomb. I have reason to believe the man behind these attacks is Bryce Landon. The crowd exploded. Residents gasped. Reporters rushed to ask questions, and a few people turned pale. Because they knew Bryce was dangerous. And now, I had just put a giant target on his back. That night, I sat on my porch, shotgun resting across my lap, waiting. Because I knew one thing for sure. Bryce Landon wasn't going to take this lying down. And when he came for me, I'd be ready. I barely slept that night. Not because I was afraid. No, fear had left me a long time ago. I was waiting because I knew Bryce Landon wouldn't let this slide. I had humiliated him in front of the whole community. I had called him out on live television, exposed him for what he was, a thug, a criminal. And if I knew anything about men like Bryce, it was that they didn't handle humiliation well. He was coming. The only question was when. I sat on my porch, shotgun in my lap, sipping coffee, scanning the darkness. Hours passed. The night dragged on. Still nothing. But at 3:27 a.m., my motion sensors went off. Front yard. I took a slow breath, setting down my coffee. My fingers tightened around the shotgun. Then I saw him, a shadowy figure, moving along the tree line. He was trying to be stealthy. But the fool didn't know I had thermal cameras installed 2 nights ago. I grinned. Checkmate. I slipped inside, grabbing my phone. I could call the cops, but that would take too long. No. This time, I wanted to handle it myself. I crept through the back door, shotgun at the ready, moving silently through the tall grass. The moonlight barely lit the yard, but I could see him now. Bryce Landon, crouched near my truck, a crowbar in his hands. I was 10 feet away when I spoke. Touch my truck, and I swear I'll make sure you never touch anything again. Bryce froze. Then, slowly, he stood up. He turned around, a smirk curling on his face. Well, I didn't think you had the guts to face me alone. I aimed a shotgun square at his chest. Try me. His eyes flickered to the gun, but he didn't look scared. He took a slow step forward. You think you're real smart, huh? He muttered, calling me out in front of the whole damn town, making me look weak. I cocked the shotgun. You are weak. That got under his skin. His face twisted in anger. You think this is over? That you've won? I kept my aim steady. No, I think you're going to get in your truck and drive away. And if you don't, I stepped forward. I'll bury you in this yard. For the first time, I saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. Then, like the coward he was, he backed up. He raised his hands, smirking again. This ain't over. I stepped closer, my voice a low growl. Oh, it is. You just don't know it yet. He turned and walked back to his truck. And as his taillights disappeared into the night, I knew one thing. Bryce had just made his last mistake. The next morning, I put my final plan into motion. Bryce and his little gang of HOA loyalists wanted me gone. They wanted their bridge back. They wanted to ruin my life. Fine. I was about to ruin theirs first. By noon, I was back at the HOA office, the one I own now. I called an emergency board meeting. The remaining HOA members shuffled in, looking nervous. They had seen what I'd done to Carter. Now, they were wondering what I'd do to them. I sat at the head of the table, folding my hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said calmly, "let's talk business." Someone cleared their throat. "What kind of business?" I smiled. "The dissolution of the HOA." Gasps filled the room. Someone choked on their coffee. "Why, you can't be serious," one woman stammered. I leaned back. "Oh, I'm dead serious. This HOA is dead weight. It's corrupt. It's useless. And I'm putting it out of its misery." One of the board members, a weaselly little man named Peterson, shook his head violently. "You don't have the authority to do that." I slid a legal document across the table. "Actually, I do." They all paled as they read it. I had bought out the HOA's assets. I had legally absorbed the board's remaining shares. And with a final majority vote, the HOA would cease to exist. Panic spread like wildfire. "This is insane," someone shouted. "No one will allow this. You'll destroy the whole neighborhood." I smirked. "Oh no, I won't destroy anything." I stood up. "I'll just own it." By 6 p.m. that night, I officially killed the HOA. No more rules. No more fines. No more idiots trying to control my land. The residents were split. Some were thrilled. Others were furious. And Bryce? Oh, he was losing his mind. But he hadn't seen the worst of it yet. Because I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That evening, I held a town meeting at the old HOA building. People packed inside, murmuring, whispering, wondering what I was planning next. I stepped up to the podium, let the silence stretch. Then I spoke. "Congratulations," I said, smiling. "You are now part of the very first privately owned community in this county." Confused murmurs. I continued. "The HOA is gone. But the land? I own it. I own the roads, the parks, the clubhouse. And most importantly, I held up the deed to the bridge. I own your way in and out of this neighborhood." Dead silence. I let the weight of that sink in. Then I said the words that made them snap. "Starting tomorrow, I will be implementing a new toll system." People lost it, shouting, screaming. I held up a hand. "But don't worry. You have two choices." I pointed at the giant contract behind me. "You can either buy out your property rights from me." I smiled. "Or you can keep paying my tolls. Forever." More gasps. More outrage. And then, a single voice. "You son of a..." I turned. Bryce Landon was storming toward me, face red with rage. I didn't move, didn't flinch, because I knew something he didn't. I leaned forward and whispered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." That was the last straw. Bryce lunged at me. The cops tackled him before he even got close. And just like that, Bryce Landon was arrested. As the police dragged him out of the building, the crowd fell into stunned silence. I adjusted my tie, turned back to the podium, and smiled. "Now," I said, "let's talk about those toll fees." Bryce Landon was gone, hauled off in handcuffs, shouting threats that no one cared about. And just like that, the last obstacle in my way had been removed. The HOA was dead. The neighborhood was mine. And now, it was time to start cashing in. The next morning, I tripled the toll fees. $60 per vehicle. No more daily passes. No more discounts. If they wanted in or out, they had to pay. And the best part? They had no other options. People tried to fight it. They tried calling lawyers. They tried petitioning the city. But the law was on my side. The roads? Privately owned. The bridge? Built illegally on my land. I had full control. And by the end of the first week, I had already made 6 figures. But that wasn't enough. I didn't just want money. I wanted revenge. I wanted them to suffer. So I sent out a new notice to every resident. New bridge policy, effective immediately. Toll increases every week. Non-payment results in a permanent ban. Residents may purchase the land rights for $100,000 per household. Mass panic. People gathered in the streets, screaming, crying, begging. I watched from my porch, sipping coffee. They wanted me gone. They wanted to steal from me. Well, now I was stealing from them. It didn't take long for the first sellouts to appear. The richer families, the ones who could afford it, paid the $100,000 without hesitation. They got full access. No tolls, no restrictions. But the others? The ones who couldn't afford it? They were trapped. Some started selling their houses just to escape. But there was one problem. Nobody wanted to buy a house in a neighborhood with a $60 toll every time you left. So, instead of selling to new buyers, they sold to me at dirt cheap prices. Within 3 months, I owned half the neighborhood. One night, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered. A familiar voice spoke. "Mr. Gerald Carter." "You win," he muttered. "Name your price." I smiled. I had been waiting for this moment. I leaned back in my chair. "Price for what?" Carter sighed. "To make this stop." I chuckled. "Oh, Carter, you don't get it, do you?" I stood up, looking out over the land that used to be his kingdom. "This doesn't stop," I said. "This is just the beginning." And I meant it. Because now that I had full control, I had one final play. Something so evil, so genius, that even I had to admire it. Because what do you do when you own half a neighborhood? You turn it into a luxury resort. The idea came to me like a bolt of lightning. I had already crippled the HOA. I had already bought up half the houses at pennies on the dollar. But I didn't just want to own the neighborhood. I wanted to transform it. And that's when it hit me. What if I turned this entire place into a luxury resort? The next morning, I got to work. I made some calls. Big calls. The kind of calls that shook the real estate market. I reached out to developers. I reached out to investors. I reached out to resort moguls. And when I told them my plan, they were all in. Because here's the thing. This neighborhood, it wasn't just some random suburb. It was prime real estate, near a major city, close to a lake, surrounded by scenic beauty. A high-end, exclusive retreat. It was a gold mine waiting to happen. A week later, I announced my plan publicly. I stood on the steps of the old HOA building, now my headquarters, and addressed the residents. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, grinning, "I have some exciting news." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I continued. "This neighborhood is officially being rebranded." Silence. Then someone asked, "Rebranded into what?" I leaned forward, microphone in hand. "A 5-star luxury resort." The reaction? Pure hysteria. Shouts. Screams. Panic. "You can't do that. This is our home." "You're insane." I held up a hand. "Relax. I have options for you." The crowd quieted slightly. I smiled. "Option 1. You buy back your land rights from me. Option 2. You sell your homes to me at market price and move somewhere else." I paused. "Or option 3. You stay here and pay resort prices." Utter chaos. People were losing their minds. But here's the thing. They couldn't stop me. I owned the land. I controlled the bridge. And now, I controlled their future. The next few months were a whirlwind of change. Construction crews rolled in. Old houses were torn down. Streets were repaved. What was once a quiet, HOA-controlled suburb was now becoming something else. Private villas replaced single-family homes. A gated entrance was installed. The bridge now had a $100 toll. And the biggest change? The HOA clubhouse? I turned it into a casino. The rich poured in. Millionaires. Celebrities. High rollers. They loved it. Gated luxury? Exclusive access? A secluded retreat? They couldn't throw their money at me fast enough. And the old residents? One by one, they left. They had no choice. Because now, they weren't just homeowners. They were living in a luxury resort they couldn't afford. And I made sure of that. One night, I sat in my new penthouse suite, the biggest house in the resort, formerly Mr. Carter's mansion, and watched the lights of the casino flicker in the distance. I had done it. I had won. The HOA? Dead. The old residents? Gone. The people who tried to destroy me? Ruined. And me? I was a billionaire. All because they built a bridge on my land. And I made them pay for it. Or so I thought. Because the next morning, I woke up to a lawsuit. A big one. And this time, the government was involved. The moment I saw the official court summons in my hands, I knew two things. 1, this wasn't some angry neighbor trying to sue me. 2, this was big. I scanned the document, my stomach twisting into knots. The county versus me. My mouth went dry. They were coming after me for zoning violations, predatory business practices, and illegal land acquisition. And worst of all, they were threatening to seize everything. I wasn't stupid. I knew I had pushed things to the limit, but I had stayed within the law, or at least I thought I had. I immediately called my lawyer, James Holloway. If there was anyone who could get me out of this, it was him. The guy had won cases for people who were guilty as sin, and I wasn't even guilty. Not really, right? We met in my penthouse later that night. James flipped through the lawsuit, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed and set the papers down. This is bad. My jaw tightened. How bad? James rubbed his temples. They're hitting you from multiple angles. The zoning issue? They're claiming you illegally converted a residential area into a commercial property without proper approval. I scoffed. I own the land. I can do whatever I want with it. James nodded. Yeah, but the county disagrees. They're arguing that because the land was originally zoned for housing, you needed special permits to make it a resort. I leaned back, processing that. What else? He sighed. The predatory practices charge? They're saying you force people out through financial coercion. I frowned. I gave him a choice. I didn't force anyone to sell. James gave me a look. You raised the tolls to $100, blocked alternative exits, and turned their community into a high-end resort overnight. I shrugged. Still not illegal. James pinched the bridge of his nose. Yeah, well, the county lawyers disagree. Then he turned the last page and went silent. A very bad, very dangerous silence. I leaned forward. What? He exhaled. The last part is eminent domain. My heart skipped a beat. I hated those two words. Eminent domain meant the government could seize my land for public interest. And if they proved their case, I could lose everything. I clenched my fists. How do we fight this? James hesitated. We can challenge the zoning charges, push back on the predatory practices claim, but eminent domain? He shook his head. That's trickier. If the county convinces a judge that this land needs to be reclaimed for public use, they can take it. I felt something boiling inside me. They wanted to steal my land. Again. First, it was the HOA. Now it was the government. I wasn't about to let that happen. I stood up, jaw clenched. Then we make sure they don't win. James sighed. And how do you plan to do that? I stared out at my empire. I had a plan. And if it worked, I wouldn't just win. I would own the entire county. The next morning, I took action. Step 1, buy out the politicians. I made some calls. Campaign donations. Sponsorships. Quiet deals. Before the county hearing even started, I had half the local officials in my pocket. Step 2, turn public opinion in my favor. I hired PR firms. I ran ads. I painted the county as a bunch of corrupt bureaucrats trying to destroy local business. Public support? Shifted overnight. People loved my resort. Tourism had boomed. Jobs had increased. Suddenly, I wasn't the villain. I was the guy bringing money into the county. And that changed everything. The court hearing arrived. The biggest event of the year. News cameras. Protesters. The courtroom was packed. The county lawyer stood up first. Your Honor, the defendant has engaged in unlawful zoning practices, financial coercion, and has taken advantage of the residents. I smiled. James leaned in. You sure about this? I grinned. Watch. When it was my turn, I stood up, straightened my suit, and walked to the podium. I cleared my throat. Then I dropped the bomb. Your Honor, I said, I'd like to present new evidence. The judge raised an eyebrow. Proceed. I pulled out a thick folder. Inside, proof that the county had approved an identical zoning change for another developer, one who had donated heavily to the mayor's campaign. Gasps filled the room. The judge flipped through the documents. His expression darkened. This is serious. I folded my arms. Serious enough to dismiss this nonsense. The county lawyer turned white. The mayor, sitting in the back, looked like he wanted to disappear. The judge took a deep breath. Then, case dismissed. The courtroom erupted. I had won. The county's case had crumbled. Eminent domain? Dead. Zoning violations? Gone. Predatory business practices? Unproven. I walked out of that courthouse untouchable. And as I stepped outside, watching reporters scramble for interviews, I felt something deep inside me. Power. I had beaten the HOA. I had beaten the county. And now, I didn't just own a resort. I owned the system. That night, I sat in my penthouse, sipping whiskey, staring out my empire. And for the first time in my life, I realized I had won everything. But then, I got a phone call, and the voice on the other end made my blood run cold. "Congratulations," the man said. "But you just made enemies in places you don't understand." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, and for the first time in a long time, I felt fear, because I had just pissed off someone way bigger than the county. And whoever they were coming for me next. I sat in my penthouse, staring at my phone. The screen was dark, the call already ended, but the words echoed in my head. "You just made enemies in places you don't understand." I had faced off against the HOA. I had taken down the county government. But this was something else. Whoever was coming after me now, they weren't playing games. The next morning, I called James. "I need to know who that call came from," I said. James hesitated. "You think it's serious?" I clenched my jaw. I don't take threats lightly. I heard him sigh. "I'll get my contacts on it." Hours later, James called back. And what he told me sent a chill down my spine. "It's bigger than we thought," he said. "That call came from a private number registered to a corporate shell." I frowned. Meaning someone powerful doesn't like what you did. And they're hiding behind layers of fake companies to make sure you don't find them. My stomach twisted. Who the hell are they? James exhaled. "I have a name, but you're not going to like it." I gritted my teeth. "Tell me." There was a pause. Then James said it. "Vincent Morello." I went ice cold. I knew that name. Everyone did. Vincent Morello wasn't just some businessman. He was a billionaire mogul. Real estate, construction, and if the rumors were true, organized crime. I clenched my fists. "What the hell does Morello want with me?" James sighed. "Apparently, you just stole one of his biggest projects." I blinked. "What?" James flipped through some papers. "The county wasn't just trying to reclaim your land for public use. They were planning to sell it." My breath caught. "To Morello." "Bingo," James said. "He had a deal lined up. He was going to turn your land into one of his resorts. And now, you've taken it from him." My mind raced. I had unknowingly stepped on the toes of one of the most powerful men in the country. And if what people said about him was true, he didn't forgive. He didn't forget. He eliminated problems. And right now, I was his biggest problem. I needed to think fast. Morello wasn't like the HOA. He wasn't like the county. I couldn't fight him in court. This was going to be a different kind of war. And if I wanted to survive, I had to strike first. I spent the next 48 hours preparing. I doubled my security. Armed guards, motion sensors, surveillance cameras, the works. I restructured ownership of my resort. I funneled it through multiple holding companies, making it nearly impossible for Morello to buy me out or take me down financially. And most importantly, I dug into him because Morello had secrets, and I was going to find them. James worked his magic, and what we found was gold. Morello had built his empire on shady land deals, bribes, tax fraud, illegal construction permits. And the biggest bombshell, he had government officials on his payroll. This wasn't just a real estate tycoon. This was a man who owned politicians, judges, law enforcement. And if I wasn't careful, he would own me too. I had two choices. One, play defense, hide, hope he loses interest. Or two, go nuclear. And I was never the type to sit back and wait. So I did the one thing Morello never expected. I went public. The next morning, every major news outlet received an anonymous leak. Morello's bribery schemes, his illegal land deals, his backdoor deals with corrupt politicians. And by noon, his empire was on fire. Investigations launched. Stock prices plummeted. The feds started sniffing around. And Morello? He was pissed. I knew it was coming. Retaliation. And when it came hard. That night, I was sitting in my penthouse when my security system tripped. Motion detected. Someone was here. I grabbed my pistol and checked the cameras. Nothing. Then, glass shattered. I spun around, just in time to see a masked man step into my living room. Gun in his hand. He raised it, and I pulled the trigger first. The gunshot echoed through the penthouse. The masked man staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. I had hit him, but not enough to put him down. He growled in pain, then raised his gun again. I dived behind the couch as bullets tore through the air, shattering glass, ripping through furniture. My ears rang from the blasts. This wasn't some petty break-in. This was a hit. Morello had sent a killer to silence me. And if I didn't end this fast, I was dead. I crawled across the floor, keeping low, my mind racing. Think, think, think. The assassin was injured. His shooting was getting sloppy. That gave me an advantage. I reached the end table, yanked open the drawer, and pulled out a second pistol. Fully loaded. I took a slow breath. Then I moved. I popped up and fired twice. Bang, bang. The first shot missed. The second hit him square in the leg. He collapsed with a grunt, dropping his gun. I sprinted forward, kicking his weapon away, then pressed my gun right against his head. "Who sent you?" I growled. The man coughed, blood dripping from his lips. "You already know. Morello." I clenched my jaw. "And what was your job?" "Kill me." The man smirked, even in pain. "No. Make you disappear." A chill ran down my spine. They weren't just trying to kill me. They wanted to erase me. Make it look like I had never existed. I pressed the gun harder against his skull. "Tell me where Morello is." "Right now." The man just laughed. "You think this ends with me?" Then, before I could react, he bit down on something. His body convulsed violently. Poison. A suicide pill. I stepped back as he choked, his body twisting. Within seconds, he was dead. I clenched my fists. This wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't just about business. This was war. I knew Morello wouldn't stop. And I knew one thing for sure. If I didn't take him out first, I wouldn't live to see the next week. The next morning, I met with James. I walked into his office, bruised, exhausted, and angrier than I had ever been. James took one look at me and sighed. "They made a move, didn't they?" I dropped my gun onto his desk. "Yeah, and it failed." James rubbed his temples. "So what now?" I leaned forward. "We end this. For good." James hesitated. "You're talking about going after Morello directly?" I nodded. James let out a long breath. "You realize this isn't just corporate warfare anymore? If you take on Morello, you're going up against his entire network. And that includes dirty cops, government officials, and a lot of very dangerous men." I smirked. "Good." I grabbed a whiskey bottle from his shelf, poured myself a drink, and downed it in one gulp. Then I set the glass down and said the words that seal my fate. "Find me everything you can on Morello. Every weakness, every enemy, every secret." James studied me for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. "All right," he said. "Let's burn him to the ground." The next 48 hours were a blur. James and I dug deep. And what we found, it was worse than I thought. Morello wasn't just a real estate mogul. He was into arms dealing, drug smuggling, human trafficking. His resorts were fronts for underground criminal operations. And the crown jewel of his empire? A private estate, heavily fortified, off the grid. That's where he was hiding. That's where I needed to go. I didn't have an army. I didn't have a team. But I had one thing Morello didn't expect. I had nothing to lose. And that made me the most dangerous man in the world. I was going to take the fight straight to his doorstep. And when I did, I was going to end this. The night was as black as coal when I arrived at the Morello estate. I had no plan. I had no backup. Just me and a single, ruthless determination to end this war before it destroyed me. I parked my truck on a dirt road a mile from his estate, under the cover of trees, and made my way to the edge of the property. The estate was a fortress, guard towers, thick walls, motion detectors, and armed men patrolling the grounds. This wasn't just a rich man's home. This was a fortress. But I wasn't here to sneak in. I wasn't here to play it safe. I was here to burn it all down. I had James give me a set of blueprints for the estate. Every security measure, every room, every route. I knew this place like the back of my hand before I even stepped foot on it. I crept around the perimeter until I found the entrance point, a small, poorly guarded service gate in the back. I slipped through, bypassing the guards with ease. The house was full of soundproof halls, thick windows, and hidden security systems. But I didn't care. I had a mission. I reached the central building, the heart of Morello's empire. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt wrong. It was too quiet. Then I heard a voice echoing down the hallway. It was Morello's voice. "I knew you'd come for me." I froze. The voice was coming from a hidden speaker system. You think you can beat me? The voice laughed. I'm everywhere. I own this city. You're just a pest, trying to bite the hand that feeds you. You've made enemies with the wrong man, kid. I gritted my teeth, trying to ignore the chill creeping down my spine. I'm not here to talk. I know, he replied, his voice dripping with malice. You're here to die. A dozen armed men emerged from the shadows, surrounding me. I was outnumbered, outgunned. But the thing was, they didn't know me. They didn't know how far I would go. I smiled coldly. If I'm going to die, it's going to be on my terms. The first bullet whizzed by my head, but I was already moving, rolling behind a pillar. I fired back. Bang! The man fell. Another one came from the left. I fired again. Another shot. Another hit. The guards were fast, but I had the element of surprise. I knew their weak spots. In a blur of action, I took down 2 more men, pushing my way deeper into the mansion. The final guard turned and ran. I chased him, and when he reached the end of the hallway, I caught him by the throat. Where is he? I demanded. The guard stammered, sweat pouring down his face. Second floor. Private office. Good choice. I let him go, and he scurried off, too terrified to fight back. I reached the second floor and finally found it, the private office. Inside, Vincent Morello was waiting. His hands were steepled in front of him, his eyes cold and calculating. You think you've won, don't you? Morello sneered. You think you're some kind of hero. You're nothing. Just a parasite who got lucky. I narrowed my eyes. Lucky? No, just smarter than you. I raised my gun. This ends now. But Morello didn't flinch. He just smiled. Then he hit a button under his desk. A hidden door slid open, and armed guards poured in from a concealed room. I didn't hesitate. I fired. The guards fell one by one. Bang, bang, bang. Morello's smirk faded. He scrambled to the side, trying to escape, but I was faster. I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into the desk. You're finished, I said, my voice low. Your empire, your deals, all of it's going down. Your friends in the government, they're already on the way to jail. Morello struggled, his face turning purple. You have no idea what you're doing. You're playing with fire, kid. I'll burn you to the ground. Not anymore, I said coldly. You're done. The door burst open behind me. Police officers flooded in, led by James. Morello's eyes widened. He looked at me in disbelief. You turned them against me? I smiled. You should have been more careful who you crossed. The officers moved swiftly, cuffing Morello and dragging him away. By the time the sun rose, Morello's empire was completely shattered. The police had raided every one of his properties. His assets were frozen. His criminal network was exposed. And as for me, I was untouchable. The media hailed me as a hero for exposing Morello's empire, for taking down one of the most powerful criminals in the country. But in truth, I didn't care about the praise. I cared about surviving. The luxury resort I had built, the land I had fought for, it was all mine now. I turned it into something greater, something that benefited the people who had supported me. The bridge tolls? They were gone. The community was thriving. I had taken down Morello, but I had also built something that outlasted him. And in the end, that was my victory. As I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, watching the sunset, I finally felt a sense of peace. Because in the end, it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the power. It was about freedom.